Thank you to Carol for that lovely rendition. You are welcome here, just the way you are. If you are straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, intersexual, demisexual, pansexual, asexual, have another label, or resist labels completely, you are whole and welcome here. If you are transgender, non-binary, genderqueer, or cisgender, you are whole and welcome here. If you are confused about your sexuality, if you have questions, if you are struggling in an intimate relationship or struggling because you aren't in one, you are whole and welcome here. If you have had an abortion or an unintended pregnancy, given up a child for adoption, had a miscarriage, have AIDS or HIV, struggle with infertility or sexual dysfunction, you are whole and welcome here. If you've been the victim of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, sexual assault, you are whole and welcome here. If you have made sexual decisions or had behaviors that you regret, you are welcome here, and we will help you offer restorative justice and healing to those you have harmed. Your sexuality is holy and sacred and an integral part of who you are. You are whole and welcome here. As Unitarian Universalists, we side with you. We love you, and we will fight for your rights. We seek to create a world where sexuality and sexual diversity are celebrated with holiness and integrity. When I write my memoir, the first line is likely to be, unlike most people, I learned about sex from my parents and religion from my friends. My parents were remarkably open about sexuality, and my mom is here someplace in the Zoom world listening. I found my mother's birth control pills in the kitchen when I was 7, and I asked her what they were. And she answered my question directly. Those are birth control pills. We've had the children we want, and so I take this each day so we can enjoy sex without worrying. I know. When I was 11, my parents took us on a field trip to Fire Island so we could see gay people. At dinner, we discussed civil rights, the women's movement, and yes, sex. It wasn't until I was in college that I learned that most parents don't talk to their children about sexuality, that most people grow up with a complicated stew of misinformation, myth, fear, guilt, shame, confusion about their sexuality, and it often comes from their religion. So I want you to think for a moment, might even raise your hand in your box. Did the church of your youth tell you that your sexuality was a blessing from God and that you should celebrate it? Or I'm watching or did you learn that sexuality needed to be controlled, that your sexual feelings were wrong, and that sex only belonged in a monogamous, lifelong heterosexual marriage, preferably with procreation as the goal? Or maybe you got mixed messages about your sexuality from your religion. Or some of you are thinking, they never mentioned this at all. For more than 45 years now, my vocation has been helping people understand that sexuality is a central part of life for all of us. No matter how old we are, no matter our gender, our orientation, our romantic orientation, and to work to help people understand that their sexuality, their spirituality, and how they practice their faith are intimately connected. During the past 20 years, my ministry has helped thousands of religious professionals, congregations, and denominations become sexually healthy and just. And I've organized religious progressives to speak out for sexual justice. But I want to take you back even further. I have vivid memories of January 22nd, 1973. That was the day that the Supreme Court overturned the ban on abortions in the US. I was a freshwoman in college. We were elated. The days of having to arrange rides to New York City for abortions were going to be over. The days of women dropping out of high school and college to have babies they were ill-equipped to raise were over. We thought this right was secure forever. The first time I marched for women's rights was in 1976. I wore a long white dress with a purple and yellow sash modeled after the suffragettes. I was 22. I have lost track of the number of times I have marched or spoken at rallies in Washington, D.C. I have counted 28 since January of 2016. My family, including our 4-year-old daughter, marched for access to abortion in 1989. I was 35. We marched again in 2003 as a family, and that time I was a speaker at a rally in front of the Capitol. In 2016, I spoke at a rally at the Supreme Court as it heard a case about abortion clinics. You can actually watch that speech on my website. And this past December 1st, I was once again back in the court. Here's a slide, a picture of me with my Unitarian Universalist colleagues. That's 45 years of protesting on abortion rights. When I was there this past December, I couldn't help but think of this sign that I saw at the Women's March in 2020, held by a woman older than me. I was 19 when Roe was decided and 62 when marriage equality became the law of the land, and I thought we were done with having to fight for sexual rights. We aren't done. The last administration worked mightily to roll back sexual rights, even as the president boasted on national TV about his sexual conquests. In 2021, 8 states enacted bills against transgender people, limiting their rights to sports, to bathrooms, even to medical care. And many more states are considering these bills this year. I know you know that Texas enacted a law banning all abortions at 6 weeks of pregnancy, 4 weeks post-conception. And there is a Mississippi law that bans abortion at 15 weeks that is currently being deliberated by the Supreme Court. Most of the leaders I know in the reproductive justice movement believe that the Roe decision will be overturned this year. Overturned. 21 states are ready to ban abortion when that happens. See, what you need to understand is that abortion and LGBTQ rights are intertwined. The Supreme Court cases that gave gay people the right to have sex, and yes, that was not given to them until 2003, and the right to marry are based on the Roe decision's affirmation of a constitutional right to privacy. But it's more than just the legal aspects. Both reproductive rights and sexual orientation rights are fundamentally about the right to be able to live your sexual, intimate, personal life without governmental interference. All adult sexual rights, the right to marry, the right to pleasure, the right to bodily autonomy, are endangered if anyone's rights to a consensual adult sexual relationship is imperiled. And all of this is happening despite the fact that most Americans support sexual rights. 7 in 10 Americans believe abortion should be legal, at least in some circumstances. And an equal percentage believe that there should be laws protecting LGBTQ plus people from discrimination. People from every religion support the right of individuals to make their own moral decisions. Clear majorities from every religious tradition in the United States support safe and legal abortion, except evangelical Christians. Now, what I want to tell you is there is nothing new about this religious support for sexual and reproductive justice. More than a dozen major religious denominations passed policies, some as many as 60 years ago, to support access to legal abortion. In the 1960s, it was clergy who opened the first abortion clinic in New York City in the United States and who fought for the repeal of abortion laws. Our denomination, Unitarian Universalism, was in the vanguard of promoting women's and LGBTQ rights. So we, my friends, we need to call the attacks on women and attacks on LGBTQ people what they are: immoral attacks on people's rights and moral agency. Laura Penny, a journalist, wrote this in the New Republic: "We live in a society that is comfortable letting men get away with sexual violence, but determined not to let women get away with consensual sex." She goes on, "It is time to be completely clear. Forcing a woman to give birth against her will is morally equivalent to rape. It is the same logic of entitlement and abuse. Men get to control women's bodies. Female sexual agency must be punished. Women's consent doesn't matter." So, as people of faith, we cannot allow the extreme right to be the voice of religion in the public square. We need to reclaim the Bible, the flag, after January 6th, democracy, and for those of us who are theists, God, from those on the right who claim to own them. Now, we have work to do. We must do a better job of articulating consistent and common sense moral messages. We need to say the sin is never sex and sexuality. The sin is sexual violence, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, and misconduct. The sin is never homosexuality, but heterosexism, the presumption that there is one way to love. The sin is not transgender people, but transphobia. The sin is forcing a pregnant person to carry a pregnancy to term and give birth against their will. The sin is to deny anyone their God-given gift of who they are, of their own sexual and gender identity, or the information, services, and rights they need to make responsible decisions. See, I know from all of my work all these years that America understands that the goal of sexuality education is to develop healthy sexual adults who appreciate their own bodies and interact with all genders in respectful ways. We must have a goal to help people, regardless of who they love and who they are attracted to, if anyone at all, to make decisions congruent with their own personal values. All of us have to learn to discriminate between sexual behaviors that are life-enhancing and those that might be harmful to someone else. We need to articulate a new ethic for a moral sexual relationship. It is not a wedding band that makes sex moral, or whether the partners are straight or gay or bisexual, but whether the relationship is consensual, non-exploitive, honest, mutually pleasurable, and protected against disease and pregnancy. We need to say that love is love is love. Everyone must have the ability to affirm their sexual and gender identity and to live without discrimination, fear, and violence. We, as progressives, must affirm that freedom of religion means that government cannot privilege the teachings of one religion over another. We know no single religious voice can speak out for all faith traditions or all people of faith on such sexuality issues as abortion, same-sex partnerships, gender, sexuality education, stem cell research, and so on. And I believe that America understands that government should not take a side on religious differences. The founding document of my organization was called the Religious Declaration on Sexual Morality, Justice, and Healing. It was endorsed by more than 8,000 American religious leaders. It claims sexuality is central to our humanity and integral to our spirituality. It recognizes that almost every faith tradition starts with a celebration of the goodness of our bodies and our sexuality, and that too many have suffered when sexualities have been abused or exploited. It calls on congregations of all stripes and kinds to look at how they offer sexuality education, not just to youth, but to people of all ages, including midlife and older and elder adults, how we welcome all, and how we have policies and procedures to keep people free from sexual abuse, harassment, and misconduct. At some point in the future, I'd love to do more work with this fellowship on those issues and your own policies. The closing words of the Religious Declaration state, God rejoices when we celebrate our sexuality with holiness and integrity. And so may it be for each of us, for our children and for our grandchildren in all the days ahead. So may it be. Amen.